My name is Justin Cooper, and 17 years ago, my life shattered when my sister Stephanie accused me of something unthinkable. I was only 15 when my parents, Gerald and Martha, chose to believe her over me. I still remember the confusion in their eyes as authorities took me away, handcuffed and terrified. What I never expected was that years later, Stephanie's confession would reveal a truth so devastating that it would destroy what remained of our family. This is how my own sister's lie destroyed my family and how the truth finally set us all free, but at what cost? Before I dive into this painful story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by those who should have protected you the most. Growing up in our middle-class suburban home in Westbrook, Pennsylvania, I had what most would consider a normal childhood. My parents weren't perfect, but they provided stability, comfort, and what I thought was unconditional love. Dad worked as the administrator at Westbrook Memorial Hospital, a prestigious position that came with both respect in the community and the unspoken pressure to maintain a perfect family image. Mom stayed home until I was in middle school, then took a part-time job at the local library, which suited her quieter nature. Before everything fell apart, I was your typical high school sophomore with decent grades and plans for college. I played baseball, worked part-time at the local grocery store bagging items, and spent weekends with my best friend Trevor Wilson playing video games or shooting hoops at the community court. Nothing remarkable, but nothing problematic either. I had my sights set on Penn State, hoping to study engineering like my grandfather. Stephanie was 3 years younger than me, just entering 7th grade when our lives imploded. From an early age, there was something different about how my parents treated her. When I needed new baseball equipment, it required weeks of negotiation and promises of extra chores. When Stephanie wanted new dance outfits or art supplies, they appeared almost magically. I noticed it, but I tried not to let it bother me too much. "Your sister is more sensitive," Mom would explain whenever I pointed out the disparity. "She needs more encouragement." Dad approached discipline differently with us too. With me, rules were rules, and breaking them meant consequences, no excuses accepted. With Stephanie, there were always exceptions, always understanding for her emotional nature. "Boys need to learn structure," he'd say. "Girls need nurturing." In the months before the accusation, tensions in our house had been rising. Stephanie's grades had been slipping, and she'd been caught skipping school twice. She'd also started hanging around with a group of older kids that even our lenient parents found concerning. I remember overhearing my father raise his voice at her for the first time after she came home past midnight on a school night. "You're throwing away your future," he'd said, his voice sharp with disappointment. That night, I heard her crying in her room. Not the dramatic sob she usually produced when she didn't get her way, but something quieter and more genuine. Part of me wanted to check on her, but our relationship had grown increasingly distant as I focused on my own goals and friends. Looking back, I wish I had reached out. Mom's anxiety had been getting worse during this period too. She'd always been prone to worry, but she'd started having what Dad called episodes, where she'd need to lie down in a darkened room for hours. The doctor had prescribed medication, but she often forgot to take it, leading to unpredictable mood swings and an increasing tendency to avoid any family conflict. "Just let me handle your sister," Dad would tell Mom whenever Stephanie's behavior came up. "You focus on staying calm." Trevor was the only person who really understood my growing frustration with the family dynamic. An only child himself, he was fascinated by and slightly envious of having a sibling, but he also recognized the unfairness in how differently we were treated. "Your parents act like she's made of glass and you're made of stone," he observed one afternoon as we walked home from school after Stephanie had thrown a fit over having to ride the bus with us instead of getting a ride from Mom. "She knows exactly how to play them," I replied, kicking a stone down the sidewalk. "And they fall for it every time." What I didn't realize then was how much more complicated the situation was. My father's position at the hospital had recently been threatened by budget cuts and administrative changes. He'd started bringing work stress home, though he tried to hide it. My mother's anxiety was partly a response to this uncertainty. And Stephanie, always intuitive about emotional undercurrents, had sensed the instability and was reacting in the only way she knew how, by demanding more attention. None of us recognized the dangerous combination these factors created: a father desperate to maintain control and project success, a mother retreating from emotional challenges, a teenage girl learning that dramatic behavior got results, and me, increasingly resentful and isolated within my own family. We were a pressure cooker waiting to explode, and I had no idea I would be the one to bear the brunt of the blast. The night that changed everything started like any other Tuesday dinner. Mom had made lasagna, Dad was talking about hospital politics, and Stephanie was pushing food around her plate, clearly bored. I was distracted, thinking about a science project due at the end of the week. The normalcy of it makes what happened next even more surreal in my memory. "I need to tell you something," Stephanie said suddenly, her voice trembling. We all looked up, and I remember noticing her red-rimmed eyes for the first time. Had she been crying? "What is it, sweetheart?" Mom asked, immediately concerned. Stephanie looked directly at me, then quickly away. "It's about Justin." "What about your brother?" Dad put down his fork, his attention fully engaged now. What came next still plays in my nightmares. Through tears and halting words, Stephanie claimed that I had been coming into her room at night, touching her inappropriately, threatening her if she told anyone. As she spoke, I felt like I was floating outside my body, hearing these horrible lies about someone else. "That's insane," I finally managed to say when she paused for breath. "I never did anything like that. Ever." Mom had gone pale, her hand at her throat. Dad was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "Why would your sister say such things if they weren't true?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because she's lying," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "She's making it up. You know how she is, she makes up stories all the time." Stephanie began crying harder. "See? He's calling me a liar. That's what he said he'd do if I ever told." The next hours were a blur of confusion and fear. Dad called someone, I later learned it was a lawyer friend, who advised him to contact the authorities immediately. By midnight, Detective Ryan Mitchell was sitting in our living room, taking Stephanie's statement while I waited in the kitchen with my mother, who wouldn't look at me. "I need to talk to Justin alone," Mitchell said eventually, coming into the kitchen. He took me to my bedroom, closed the door, and asked question after question about my relationship with my sister, my daily routine, where I was on specific dates. I answered truthfully, still believing that the truth would be obvious. This was clearly a misunderstanding or one of Stephanie's attention-seeking schemes gone too far. "Your sister has some physical evidence that supports her claims," Mitchell said finally, watching me closely. "What evidence?" "There can't be any evidence of something that never happened." Later, I would learn that Stephanie had torn her own pajamas and scratched her inner thighs to create marks. She'd hidden the clothing and taken photos of the injuries on her flip phone. It was calculated in a way I never imagined my 12-year-old sister capable of. When Mitchell left, he said he'd be in touch the next day. My parents and I sat in the living room in horrible silence. Stephanie had been taken to my aunt's house for the night. "For her safety." "I didn't do it," I said, my voice breaking. "You have to believe me." Mom started crying silently. Dad just stared at the floor. "We don't know what to believe right now," he finally said. "But Stephanie has never made accusations like this before. And she seemed genuinely traumatized. She's always been dramatic." I protested. "You know that. She's making this up for attention or to get me in trouble because I told her friends to stop hanging around our house last week." The look my father gave me then still burns. No normal 12-year-old would make up something like this for attention. "What kind of monster do you think your sister is?" The irony of his question would haunt me for years. By morning, something had shifted. My parents were moving around me like I was contaminated. Mom flinched when I reached past her for the cereal. Dad told me to pack a bag. "The detective is coming back this morning," he explained stiffly. "They may need to take you in for further questioning." "Take me in? Like to jail?" "Dad, this is crazy. Until we figure out what's happened, you can't stay here with your sister." The betrayal in that sentence knocked the wind out of me. They were choosing her over me, believing her impossible story rather than my desperate truth. When Detective Mitchell arrived with another officer, he explained that based on Stephanie's statement and the evidence, they were taking me into custody for questioning. As they led me to the police car, I looked back at our house. My parents stood in the doorway, my father's arm around my mother's shoulders. Neither moved to stop what was happening. Neither called out that there must be some mistake. I realized in that moment that I was completely alone. The juvenile detention center smelled like industrial cleaner and sweat. The intake process was humiliating: strip search, institutional clothes, personal items confiscated, endless questions about my mental state and whether I had suicidal thoughts. I answered mechanically, still convinced that this nightmare would end once someone rational looked at the facts. My case was assigned to social worker Elaine Barnes, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes who seemed to be the only person who approached me without immediate judgment. "I want you to know that I'm here to listen to your side," she said during our first meeting. "Nothing you say leaves this room unless it directly relates to your safety." I told her everything, about our family dynamics, Stephanie's history of seeking attention through increasingly dramatic means, the recent tensions at home. She listened carefully, taking notes. "I believe you're being truthful with me, Justin," she said finally. "But the system moves slowly, and accusations like this are taken very seriously. We need to prepare you for a potentially lengthy process." The detention center housed about 20 other boys between 13 and 17. Most were there for drugs, theft, or fighting. When word got around about why I was there, and it always got around, I became a target. Only the threat of extended sentences kept the worst of the bullying at bay. I learned quickly to keep to myself, to speak only when spoken to never show weakness. I spent hours in the small library, losing myself in books to escape my reality. I wrote letters to my parents every week, pleading for them to reconsider, to look more closely at Stephanie's claims, to remember who I really was. I never received a response. After 3 weeks, I was assigned a public defender named Martin Green. Middle-aged with perpetually wrinkled suits and bloodshot eyes, he had a caseload that made individual attention impossible. "The prosecution has physical evidence, witness testimony from your sister, and documentation from her therapist about trauma symptoms," he explained during our first 15-minute meeting. "Your parents' statements don't help either." "What did they say?" I asked, dreading the answer. "They indicated that while they had never suspected abuse, they've noticed changes in your sister's behavior consistent with trauma. Your father specifically mentioned increased irritability on your part in recent months. Normal teenage irritability was now evidence of my supposed crimes." The unfairness was staggering. Green recommended a plea deal, admission to a lesser charge in exchange for a shorter sentence served in a juvenile rehabilitation facility rather than detention. "If this goes to trial and you're convicted of the original charges, you could be tried as an adult despite your age." "But I'm innocent," I insisted. His tired eyes met mine. "Innocence doesn't always matter as much as we want it to in the system. You're a minor accused by another minor, with parents who aren't supporting your defense. Those are terrible odds." During the court appearances to discuss these options, I kept looking for my parents in the gallery. They never came. Elaine Barnes told me they had been advised by their personal attorney to maintain distance from the proceedings to avoid any appearance of conflict given that they had 2 minor children on opposite sides of the case. "They're protecting themselves legally," she explained, unable to hide her disapproval. "And who's protecting me?" I asked. After 2 months of legal limbo, and watching other kids receive regular family visits while I remained alone, I made the hardest decision of my life. I took the plea deal, admitting to a crime I never committed because fighting seemed futile without anyone in my corner. The juvenile rehabilitation facility was marginally better than detention. Located in a converted country estate outside Pittsburgh, it had dorm-style rooms instead of cells, more educational opportunities, and regular therapy sessions. Still, it was a prison with different wallpaper. It was there I met Marcus Johnson, another 16-year-old who maintained his innocence despite taking a plea deal for alleged drug distribution. "My cousin was dealing and left his stash in my backpack," he explained during a late-night conversation. "But with my dad already in prison and 3 strikes on his record, nobody believed me. Easier to just take the year and get out with a sealed record than risk adult time." Marcus understood my situation in a way no one else could. We formed a friendship based on mutual recognition of injustice and the pragmatic choices we'd made to survive it. The facility's lead counselor, Dr. Raymond Wilson, became another unexpected ally. A former juvenile offender himself who had turned his life around through education, he approached each resident with a mix of tough expectations and genuine compassion. "The system failed you," he told me after reviewing my case files. "I can't change that. But I can help you ensure that when you leave here, you have the tools to build a life despite what's happened." Under his guidance, I completed my high school education, began taking college correspondence courses, and learned to manage the depression and trust issues that had developed since my accusation. When suicidal thoughts began to overwhelm me during my second winter there, it was Dr. Wilson who noticed the signs and got me the additional help I needed. "Your life isn't over," he insisted during our darkest session. "It's just taking a detour none of us would have chosen. But you still get to decide what happens next." I clung to those words on the days when breathing seemed like too much effort, when the anger and hurt threatened to consume me entirely. By the time of my release at 18, I had been institutionalized for nearly 3 years. My juvenile record would be sealed, but the experience had left invisible scars that no paperwork could erase. I had no home to return to, no parents waiting to help me transition to adulthood. Just a bus ticket to Westbrook and the phone number for a halfway house. Instead of using the ticket, I called the one person who had never abandoned me. "I'll pick you up," Trevor said immediately. "My parents said you can stay with us until you get on your feet." His loyalty was the first real glimmer of hope I'd felt in years. Trevor's family lived in a modest 3-bedroom house across town from my parents. His mother Sandra hugged me tightly when I arrived, and his father Robert shook my hand firmly, looking me directly in the eyes. "You're welcome here for as long as you need," he said simply. They had converted their home office into a small bedroom for me. It wasn't much, a twin bed, a desk, and a second-hand dresser, but it was offered without judgment, and that made it more valuable than anything I'd owned before. Finding work with a record, even a sealed juvenile one, proved challenging. Most employers in our small town knew about my case through gossip if not official channels. After 2 weeks of rejections, I landed a job stocking shelves at Davidson's Hardware on the edge of town. The owner, Frank Davidson, was a gruff Vietnam veteran who cared more about work ethic than rumors. "Be here at 6, don't steal, don't lie," he said after a 5-minute interview. "What happened before you walk through my door isn't my business unless you make it my business." The pay was minimal, but it was a start. I worked double shifts whenever possible, saving every dollar. Trevor's parents refused to accept rent, so I contributed by handling home repairs, yard work, and cooking dinner twice a week. I was determined not to be a burden. Continuing my education seemed impossible at first. The community college required a home address for financial aid applications, and using Trevor's family's address complicated their tax situation. My sealed record technically shouldn't have affected educational opportunities, but small-town memories are long. Frank noticed my frustration one evening as I crumpled yet another application form. "What are you trying to do there?" he asked as we closed the store. I explained my education goals and the roadblocks I kept encountering. "My sister-in-law works in admissions at Riverview Community College," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Come to dinner Sunday. Bring your transcripts from that facility program." That dinner changed everything. Frank's sister-in-law Lisa recognized my situation as the kind of case that fell through institutional cracks. She helped me navigate the application process, find applicable scholarships, and get admitted for the spring semester. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said. "Especially those who never got a fair first one." Frank became more than an employer. He became a mentor. He expanded my responsibilities at the store, teaching me inventory management, basic accounting, and customer service. When I expressed interest in construction, he introduced me to his friend who ran a small contracting company where I could pick up weekend work for extra money and experience. "You've got a good head for practical problems," Frank observed after I redesigned the store's storage system. "Don't waste it." Through my construction job, I met Natalie Chin, an architectural student doing an internship with the company. Smart, driven, and refreshingly direct, she asked me about my background on our third lunch break together. "I heard some things," she admitted, "but I'd rather get the truth from you." I hesitated, then told her everything. I expected disgust or discomfort. Instead, she listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and reached for my hand when I finished. "That's a lot for anyone to carry," she said simply. "Thank you for trusting me with it." Our relationship developed slowly. My experiences had left me wary of vulnerability, and her previous relationship had ended badly. We moved forward carefully, building trust through honesty and consistency. After a year of dating, we moved into a small apartment together near the community college. During these years, I made periodic attempts to learn about my family through social media and mutual acquaintances. I discovered that my father had been promoted to chief administrator at the hospital. My mother had quit her library job. Stephanie had graduated high school and apparently gone to some college out of state, though details were sparse. I told myself I was seeking this information for closure, but the truth was more complicated. Despite everything, some childish part of me still hoped for reconciliation, for an acknowledgement of the terrible mistake that had been made. That hope died when I came across my father's obituary online 5 years after my release. He had suffered a massive heart attack at work. The obituary listed his surviving family: my mother, my sister, various extended relatives. My name was conspicuously absent, as if I had never existed. I didn't attend the funeral. Trevor offered to go with me for support, but I couldn't face appearing where I clearly wasn't wanted. Instead, I spent the day hiking alone in the state park, trying to process the complicated grief of losing someone who had already chosen to lose me. "Are you okay?" Natalie asked when I returned, red-eyed and exhausted. "No," I admitted. "But I'm learning to be okay with not being okay sometimes." By my 27th birthday, I had completed an associate's degree in construction management, been promoted to project manager at the contracting company, and built a small but loyal circle of friends who knew my full story and stood by me anyway. I had created a new family to replace the one that had abandoned me. I had built a life that, while marked by my past, wasn't defined by it. Or so I thought, until the email arrived that would unearth everything I had tried to bury. The email came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was reviewing blueprints for an upcoming project while Natalie prepared dinner in our kitchen. The notification sound barely registered until I glanced at the sender, Stephanie Cooper. My stomach dropped. The subject line read simply, "I need to talk to you." For several minutes, I just stared at the unopened message, my heart pounding. I hadn't heard from my sister in 15 years. What could she possibly want now? When I finally opened it, the message was brief. "Justin, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I've been trying to get sober, and part of that process means making amends. There are things I need to tell you face to face. Please respond if you're willing to meet. Stephanie." My first instinct was to delete it without responding. Whatever amends she wanted to make couldn't possibly compensate for what she had done. I closed my laptop and tried to focus on the evening ahead, but the email haunted me. That night I barely slept. Natalie held me as I tossed and turned, listening as I cycled through anger, curiosity, and fear. "You don't owe her anything," Natalie reminded me. "Not a response, not forgiveness, nothing." "I know," I replied. But part of me has been waiting for this for 15 years, some acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. The next day, I called Dr. Patricia Lane, the therapist I had been seeing intermittently since leaving the rehabilitation facility. She had helped me work through my trauma and establish healthy boundaries in other relationships. "This is a significant development," she said after I explained the situation. "Before you decide whether to respond, get clear on what you hope to gain from any potential contact. Are you looking for an apology? Explanations? Closure?" "All of those," I admitted. "But I'm also afraid of reopening old wounds that have finally started to heal." "That's a valid concern," she acknowledged. "There's no right answer here, Justin. Meeting with Stephanie could provide answers you've needed, or it could set back your progress. The question is whether the potential benefits outweigh the risks for you personally." After several days of consideration, I sent a short reply. "I'm willing to exchange messages for now. I need to know more about what you want to discuss before agreeing to meet in person." What followed was a series of increasingly raw emails. Stephanie explained that she had struggled with substance abuse since her late teens, cycling through periods of recovery and relapse. She had dropped out of college, worked various dead-end jobs, and recently completed her third rehabilitation program. "I've done a lot of damage," she wrote, "to myself and others. But nothing compares to what I did to you. I need to explain face to face. Please." Natalie reviewed each message with me, offering her perspective. "She seems genuinely remorseful," she observed after reading the latest email. "But remorse doesn't erase consequences." "What would you do?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. "I think I would want to know the full truth, even if it hurt. Not knowing leaves too much space for imagination, which is sometimes worse than reality. But this is entirely your decision." After 2 weeks of correspondence, I agreed to meet Stephanie at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. I chose a public location for emotional safety and asked Trevor to wait nearby in case things went badly. The morning of our meeting, I could barely function from anxiety. I changed clothes 3 times, unable to decide how I wanted to present myself. Natalie finally placed her hands on my shoulders, steadying me. "Remember, you have the power here," she said firmly. "You can leave at any time. You don't have to accept anything she says. This is on your terms." The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, which provided some comfort. I chose a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and ordered a black coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. 10 minutes later, Stephanie walked in. I almost didn't recognize her. The sister in my memory was a fresh-faced 12-year-old with bouncy curls and an easy smile. This woman was thin to the point of gauntness, with dull hair pulled back severely from a face line beyond its 29 years. She scanned the room anxiously before spotting me, and something like fear flashed across her features. She approached hesitantly, clutching her purse like a shield. "Justin," she said, her voice barely audible above the coffee shop noise. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak immediately. She sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her purse on the table. "You look good," she offered. "Healthy. What do you want, Stephanie?" I asked, cutting through the awkward attempt at small talk. She flinched at my directness but nodded as if accepting it as fair. "I want to tell you the truth. All of it. Not just about what I did, but about what happened afterward." "Which is what, exactly?" Her eyes filled with tears. "It's worse than you know. Much worse. And I can't do this here after all. There's too much. Can we go somewhere more private?" "I'm not going anywhere private with you," I said firmly. "Then can we meet again tomorrow? At my apartment? I have things to show you, proof of what I'm going to tell you." "What kind of proof?" She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Mom and Dad knew, Justin. They found out I was lying a few months after you were sent away. And they chose to do nothing about it." The coffee shop suddenly seemed to recede around me, ambient noise fading as blood rushed in my ears. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. That's impossible. I managed finally. They wouldn't. They did, she whispered, a tear sliding down her hollow cheek. And I need you to know everything. I'm dying, Justin. I don't have much time left, and I can't take this to my grave. I stood abruptly, nearly knocking over my untouched coffee. I need time to process this. She nodded, quickly writing her address on a napkin. Tomorrow at 2? Please come. After that, if you never want to see me again, I'll understand. I took the napkin mechanically and left without another word, my mind reeling with implications too massive to comprehend in that moment. Stephanie's apartment was in a rundown complex on the outskirts of town. The hallway smelled of cabbage and cigarettes, and peeling wallpaper revealed patches of mold beneath. I hesitated before knocking, still uncertain if I was making a terrible mistake by coming. She opened the door immediately, as if she'd been waiting just on the other side. The apartment beyond her was small and sparsely furnished but meticulously clean. A hospital bed occupied one corner of the living room, surrounded by medication bottles and medical supplies. Thank you for coming, she said, stepping back to let me enter. Can I get you anything? Water? Tea? Just the truth, I replied, remaining standing even as she gestured toward a worn sofa. She nodded, disappearing briefly into another room before returning with a shoebox and what looked like an old diary. You should sit, she advised. This will take some time. Reluctantly, I lowered myself onto the edge of the sofa. Stephanie sat in an armchair opposite me, the box and diary in her lap. For a moment she seemed to struggle for words. I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times, she admitted. But now that you're here, I don't know where to start. Start with why, I suggested, my voice harder than I intended. Why did you lie about me? She nodded, accepting the directive. I was 12 and angry and jealous. You were the golden child, good grades, good at sports, responsible. Dad was always talking about how proud he was of you, how you were going to go to college and do great things. So you destroyed my life because you were jealous? The simplicity of it was almost more painful than some complex explanation would have been. It wasn't supposed to go that far, she said quickly. I just wanted attention. I wanted them to focus on me for once. I thought if I said something shocking, they'd worry about me, spend more time with me. I never thought they'd actually believe me, not really. I figured they'd talk to you, you'd deny it, and then everyone would be concerned about poor troubled Stephanie for a while. She wiped at her eyes. I didn't understand the consequences. I didn't know they'd call the police, that you'd be taken away. Once it started, everything happened so fast, and then I was trapped in the lie. Admitting the truth seemed impossible. You let me go to juvenile detention. You let me take a plea deal for something that never happened. My voice shook with barely controlled rage. I know, she whispered. I was a child who did something terrible, and then I was a teenager too cowardly to fix it. But Justin, what happened next is what you really need to hear. She opened the diary, handing it to me. This was mine from when I was 13. Read the entry from March 17th. I took the book hesitantly, turning to the date she indicated. The handwriting was juvenile, with hearts dotting the I's, but the content was chilling. Mom found my old diary today while cleaning. She read the part where I wrote about making up the stuff about Justin. She was crying and saying she had to tell Dad. I'm so scared. What's going to happen to me? Will they send me away too? I looked up at Stephanie, momentarily speechless. Mom found out you were lying? She nodded grimly. Keep reading. The next few entries. March 20th. Dad and Mom had a huge fight last night after I went to bed. I could hear them through the walls. Dad said they couldn't tell anyone the truth because he'd lose his job and maybe go to jail for filing false reports. Mom kept crying and saying they had to get you back. Dad said it was too late, that it would destroy everything if the truth came out now. March 25th. Mom hasn't gotten out of bed for 3 days. Dad says she's having one of her episodes, but it's worse than before. I tried to talk to him about Justin again, but he got really scary and said we are never to speak about it again. He said what's done is done, and we have to move forward as a family. But we're not a family anymore without Justin. April 2nd. Dad took Mom to the hospital today. He told me she had a nervous breakdown and needed special care. I know it's because of what I did and what they're doing now. This is all my fault. I closed the diary, feeling physically ill. They knew. They actually knew you were lying, and they still left me there? Stephanie reached for the shoebox. After Dad died, I found these in his home office. Letters Mom wrote to him while she was in the psychiatric hospital. Letters he never sent. And copies of the private investigator reports. She handed me a stack of papers and envelopes bound with a rubber band. They hired someone to look into my story after Mom found the diary. The investigator found inconsistencies, confirmed I had lied. Dad buried the report. For the next hour, I read through the devastating evidence. My mother's increasingly desperate letters begging my father to come forward with the truth. The investigator's detailed report dismantling Stephanie's accusations point by point. My father's handwritten notes calculating the professional and financial risks of admitting their mistake versus maintaining the status quo. Your political aspirations would be finished. He had written. Hospital board would demand resignation. Potential criminal charges for filing false reports. Civil liability in the millions. Martha's medical care already exceeding insurance caps. Financially ruinous. And then, most damningly, Justin has already begun rehabilitation program. Record will be sealed at 18. Best course, maintain current narrative, provide excellent college opportunities for S to minimize guilt, support J financially after release without direct contact. Secure future for remaining family while minimizing additional damage. I had been written off as acceptable collateral damage to protect their reputation and finances. A cold calculation that prioritized moving forward over justice or truth. After Mom's breakdown, she was never the same. Stephanie continued quietly. She became dependent on anti-anxiety medication and alcohol. Dad controlled everything, her treatment, her medication, our lives. We never spoke about you at home, but sometimes I'd find her in your room, just sitting there crying. And you? I asked, my voice hollow. You knew the truth all this time? She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I was 13 when they found out, 14 when Dad made the final decision to keep the lie going. He told me if I ever told anyone the truth, Mom would kill herself from the shame and I'd go to juvenile detention for filing false reports. I believed him. So why tell me now, after all this time? Stephanie gestured toward the hospital bed. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 3 to 6 months. When you're dying, priorities become very clear. I couldn't die knowing I'd never tried to make this right. I sat back, overwhelmed by waves of anger, vindication, and grief. Do you have any idea what you took from me? What all of you took? I do, she whispered. That's why I had to tell you everything. You deserve the truth. You deserve to know it wasn't just my childish lie that destroyed your life. It was their adult decision to protect themselves instead of you. And you deserve whatever's in Dad's estate. That's why I've already talked to a lawyer about testifying if you want to sue. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to breathe. I need time to process this. I understand, she said. Take the documents. Show them to your own lawyer. They're originals. I've made copies for myself. As I gathered the papers with shaking hands, she added, Justin? For what it's worth, I am more sorry than I can ever express. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that. I looked at my sister, this stranger who had shattered my life twice now, first with her lie and now with this terrible truth, and felt nothing but a vast, echoing emptiness. Goodbye, Stephanie, I said, and walked out with the evidence of my family's ultimate betrayal. The documents Stephanie had given me sat untouched on our dining table for 3 days. Natalie had offered to review them with me when I was ready, but the thought of reliving those revelations was almost unbearable. Still, eventually I knew I had to face the full truth and decide what to do with it. I want to confront my mother, I told Natalie one evening. Before I make any legal decisions, I need to hear her admit it to my face. Are you sure that's what you need? She asked gently. She might deny everything, and that could make things worse. I'm sure, I replied. I've spent 15 years believing my parents were deceived victims of Stephanie's lie. Finding out they knowingly continued that deception changes everything. I need to understand why. After consulting with a lawyer who confirmed the documents appeared authentic, I drove to my childhood home for the first time since being taken away in handcuffs. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the blue paint faded, the garden my mother had once tended now overgrown with weeds. My mother opened the door on the third knock. She had aged dramatically, her once dark hair now completely gray, deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth. When she saw me, her hand flew to her throat in the same gesture I remembered from the night of Stephanie's accusation. Justin, she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. We need to talk, I said simply. She stepped back wordlessly, allowing me to enter the house that had once been my home. The interior smelled of dust and neglect, with piles of newspapers and unwashed dishes visible in the kitchen beyond. I've spoken with Stephanie, I began without preamble. She gave me your letters. And Dad's notes. I know you discovered she was lying months after I was sent away. I know Dad hired an investigator who confirmed her story was false. And I know you both decided to do nothing about it. My mother sank into an armchair, her face ashen. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, might claim the documents were forged or that I had misunderstood. Instead, she began to cry, silent tears tracking down her lined face. Your father said it was too late, she finally managed. That coming forward would destroy what was left of our family without helping you. Without helping me? I repeated incredulously. I was in a juvenile facility. I had a record for something I never did. How would the truth not have helped me? Gerald said by the time we knew for certain, you had already taken the plea deal. That legally it would be nearly impossible to undo, and trying would expose Stephanie to charges and us to lawsuits. He said the best thing for everyone was to let your record be sealed at 18, and then help you privately afterward. Help me privately? You never contacted me. Not once in 15 years. She flinched at my raised voice. Gerald controlled everything. The money, the decisions. After my breakdown, he had me declared temporarily unfit. He used that to ensure I couldn't reach out to you against his wishes. By the time I was stronger, years had passed, and he convinced me you would never forgive us, that contacting you would only cause you more pain. He was right about one thing, I said coldly. I don't forgive you. Either of you. I know, she whispered. I don't deserve forgiveness. Not a day has passed that I haven't hated myself for my weakness, for not fighting harder for you. I'm going to sue for Dad's estate. I informed her. Stephanie has agreed to testify about what happened. My lawyer says I have a strong case for financial compensation. Instead of protesting, she nodded. You should. Gerald left everything to me, but none of it brings me joy. Take it all if it helps make something right. Her easy capitulation deflated some of my anger, leaving confusion in its wake. Why didn't you come forward after he died? You could have told the truth then. Cowardice, she admitted. The same cowardice that has defined my entire life. And shame too deep for words. I left my childhood home with no resolution, no catharsis, only a deeper understanding of the human capacity for moral failure. My mother was neither the monster nor the victim I had alternately imagined her to be over the years, just a deeply flawed woman who had made unforgivable choices out of fear and weakness. The lawsuit proceeded with surprising speed. With Stephanie's testimony and the documentary evidence, my mother chose not to contest the claims. The court awarded me the family home, investment accounts, and a substantial monetary settlement from my father's life insurance. The case attracted media attention despite my attempts to keep it private. A local reporter connected it to wider issues of juvenile justice and false accusations, and soon I was receiving calls from advocacy organizations and other wrongfully accused individuals seeking guidance. One of those calls came from Elaine Barnes, the social worker who had suspected my innocence years before. "I never forgot your case," she told me when we met for coffee. "It shaped how I approached every child in the system afterward. I always looked deeper, questioned more thoroughly. I'm so sorry the system failed you, but I'm grateful you're finally getting some measure of justice." Rather than retreating from the publicity, I made a difficult decision to use it constructively. With part of the settlement money, I established the Second Chance Foundation, providing legal and educational support for wrongfully accused juveniles. The work became a channel for my anger, transforming it into something productive. As Stephanie's health declined, our relationship entered complicated territory. I couldn't forgive her for initiating the lie that destroyed my youth, but I recognized the courage it had taken to finally tell the truth when she could have carried the secret to her grave. "I don't know what to feel about her," I confessed to Natalie one night after visiting Stephanie in hospice. "Part of me still hates what she did, but another part pities the lonely, scared child she was and the damaged adult she became." "You don't have to resolve those feelings neatly," Natalie reminded me. "It's possible to hold both anger and compassion at the same time. Forgiveness isn't an obligation." With my mother, I maintained firm boundaries. I provided financial support for her basic needs but declined her tearful requests for regular contact. Some wounds were too deep for conventional reconciliation. 2 years after Stephanie's confession, Natalie and I married in a small ceremony attended by the family we had chosen: Trevor and his parents, Frank and his wife, Dr. Wilson, who had traveled from Pittsburgh for the occasion, colleagues from the foundation, and friends who had stood by me through the darkest periods. 6 months later, we welcomed our son, named Franklin after the mentor who had believed in me when I had nothing. Holding him, I made a silent promise that he would always know unconditional love and unwavering support. The past never disappears completely. There are still nights when I wake in panic, momentarily back in that detention center. Days when a casual comment triggers memories of betrayal so intense I have to step away to breathe. But these moments have become rarer, overshadowed by the life I've built despite everything that was taken from me. Looking at my family now, Natalie reading on the porch swing, little Frank toddling through the grass of our backyard, I understand a truth that took me years to discover. Sometimes the family we choose heals the wounds the family we're born into creates. The bonds we forge through choice and loyalty can be stronger than those of blood. I will always carry the scars of what happened to me. But I no longer carry the burden of unanswered questions, the weight of being disbelieved, or the shame of false guilt. The truth, however painful, has finally set me free. What about you? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone who should have protected you? How did you find healing afterward? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and redemption. Share this with someone who might need to know they're not alone in their struggle for justice and healing. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your past doesn't have to define your future.